having the discussion with President Trump. They are trying to get him to a point where he doesn't blow up the World Trade Organization, all the multilateralism that they have fought so hard for.
It's a long, hard road when you walk alone.
Particularly did not take lightly the fact that it's based on a national security reason, that for Canadians who either themselves or whose parents or community members have stood shoulder to shoulder with American soldiers in far-off lands and conflicts from the First World War onwards, that it's kind of insulting.
The relationship that I've had with the people, the leaders of these countries has been, I would really rate it on a scale of 0 to 10, I would rate it a 10. That doesn't mean I agree with what they're doing, and they know very well that I don't. So we're negotiating very hard tariffs and barriers.
Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the Slackline Quote of the Day broadcast. You are back with the boss.
The boss is coming! That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you.
We are back after our season break. Thank you to anybody who tuned into season 1. This is season 2 of the Slackline, our first episode. We'll be having some guests and whatnot on soon. But for now, we are starting with just the quote of the day as per usual. A lot of stuff going on in the world these days. One of the reasons I felt compelled to turn the mic back on. Just a lot of crazy shit going down, and I mean, it's a touchy subject to bring up when talking just casually with people. You don't want to cause sparks to fly. You don't want to end up saying the wrong thing and causing somebody's opinion of you to change or whatever. So it's nice to just shout it into the void that is the internet, and if anybody wants to pick it up and listen, that is cool. Like I said, lots going on. Trump versus world trade. We got pipeline controversy here in Canada. Anthony Bourdain passed away, unfortunately. Kids being ripped apart from their parents in the southern border in the U.S. And I think that's everywhere actually, but it's definitely concentrated down near the southern border. And of course, the G7 summit talks and North Korea talks, leaving a trail of embarrassment for Trump. At least embarrassment for anybody that has any know-how as to how these things are actually supposed to work. So we will get to our sponsor today. Our sponsor is Oopsie Daisies. Oopsie Daisies Flower Shop, specializing in gifts asking for forgiveness to those you've wronged with temporary bouts of insanity. That is Oopsie Daisies Flower Shop. Thank you to them for their sponsorship today, and they bring us our quote. And that quote today is from Senator John McCain. To our allies, bipartisan majorities of Americans remain pro-free trade, pro-globalization, and supportive of alliances based on 70 years of shared values. Americans stand with you, even if our president doesn't. This quote kind of coincides with a few quotes from people in Washington and around that are, throwing out their support for the fact that Trump doesn't necessarily represent all Americans or even a majority of Americans. And a reminder, it's kind of a sober reminder for those of us that are watching and kind of, laughing and snickering or pointing or looking down our nose at Trump and Americans, or even pointing fingers at Trump and Americans and vilifying Americans. it's a reminder that there's a whole, country of people that don't support what's going on. And the amount of protests going on in the United States right now, against things like guns and Trump and for women's rights and environmental rights and all that stuff. I mean, a lot of it is unprecedented. And so I do think there is some truth to this statement that that this is kind of an outlier situation. But the question is, what do you do about it? From an American standpoint, even if you don't like what's going on, you can try to rally for impeachment. I mean, you're just gonna you just end up with a lineup of people that are going to do the same types of things and arguably be more adept and thus worse overall for everybody else. Or you wait out until the election and vote them out and vote everybody out, and you have the midterms coming up in the U.S., which are really important to change the seats in Congress and in the Senate, because that is where kind of the real power behind all this stuff lies. The Trump or the president can do what he can through executive order and through basically propaganda, as however you want to define that, by spouting BS to the American people. But it's actually Congress and Senate it's actually the Congress and the Senate that put through laws and vote yes or no on things like horrible tax bills and horrible healthcare bills and that type of thing. So that's where the real turnover needs to happen, and that hopefully will happen soon. And if that's the case, then it'll be a precursor to show that that Trump is on his way out by the end of his first term, and then maybe we can just wait till he's not president and just not impeach him and throw him in fucking jail and with a bunch of his crazy asshole friends. But in the meantime, I mean, he's doing in the meantime, this man and a few of his nut jobs can do lasting damage to global economies, to moral compasses, to personal freedom and personal safety. We can't just wait around for 2 years or whatever while threats of nuclear annihilation happen, while threats of war happen, while trade wars happen, while laws are put into place and judges are put into place, and just terrible ideas are put into place that will be very difficult to reverse, and will take years, maybe decades to reverse. And so there's a really big appetite to do something now. But I mean, there's not a lot you can do, because even if you wanted to put a bullet in his head, it's no different than impeachment. There's just a bunch of people that are lining up to take his job that are arguably more adept and thus worse. And I mean, if you were to do something like that, then the backlash from these crazy conspiracy people, even if it was just some random person who's fed up, would ultimately stir it into a violent conflict. In my opinion, I think we're not far from a violent conflict within the U.S. personally, but we'll see how that ends up all playing out. So he shows up at the G7 summit late, like a day late, and just kind of like waltzes in like it's no big deal, and acts like a baby, calling everybody else just stupid names, and citing things like Canada burning down the White House in 1812 as reasons for putting into place national security tariffs. Like, how crazy is it that all of these European allies, Germany, France, Great Britain, and other allies like Japan and Canada itself, like, are kind of becoming a coalition against a scarily powerful group of, dictators, to be honest. Russia, North Korea, and now the U.S., all with nuclear power, and all run by crazy egomaniacs. Like, it's a scary, scary situation. And I mean, you can see just in some of the pictures from that summit, people are just fed up with Trump and trying to convince him to see reason, versus just being, petty in his foreign policy, trying to right personal wrongs or whatever he thinks people have done to him, by doing things that ultimately hurt him and everyone else around, that ultimately hurt the American people and the world overall. And, I don't see how, like, everybody could scream this in his face and he just refused to believe it. And it just makes no sense. Like, there's no defense against that. There's no way you can win that argument if he's just going to refuse to believe the truth about things. Yeah, there's nowhere to go from there. Now they go into the North Korea talks, and, like, I don't see how that can go well. Like, I really don't. How can anybody think that this will end up with anything but a dick measuring contest between Kim Jong-un and Trump, which is another scary proposition when you consider they both have nuclear weapons at their disposal, and and that Korea is far enough away that any conflict over there won't directly affect, well, would likely not directly affect many Americans, as far as casualties is concerned, in comparison to South Korea. And so Americans, historically Americans and people actually tend to have no problem, tend to have, not much of a problem or interest in wars going on in countries that aren't their own, even if their own country's involved. So I didn't want to get too deep into Trump, but I guess I did. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely trade issues between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, including labor including transfer of labor, dairy issues, stuff like that. But I mean, to pick a fight with your largest trading partners for really no apparent reason, only to hurt everybody involved, obviously it just makes straight up no sense. That's kind of the motto of this whole administration, I guess. So, yeah, I guess we'll call her there for today. That is it for the quote of the day Slackline. Once again, that quote today was from John McCain, Senator John McCain, struggling with health issues right now. Posts to our American allies: bipartisan majorities of Americans remain pro-free trade, pro-globalization, and supportive of alliances based on 70 years of shared values. Americans stand with you, even if our president doesn't. That is Senator John McCain from Arizona, and probably from a hospital bed, to be honest. He is not feeling very well these days, but well enough to send out a message of support like that. And that quote today brought to us again by Oopsie Daisies, flower shop specializing in gifts begging for forgiveness that you give to those who've you wronged with temporary insanity. That again is Oopsie Daisies flower shop. We could use an Oopsie Daisies between Trump and his allies right now. That's it for the Slackline. Thanks to anybody that's tuning in for season 2. We will be back tomorrow. Thanks to Crooked Spies for providing the tunes today. Make sure you follow the Slackline on Instagram at the.slack.line, on Twitter at slackline_radio, and on YouTube at the Slackline Podcast. You have been listening to The Boss.
The boss is coming! That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you.
This has been Quote of the Day for Monday, June 11th. Thanks to anybody paying attention, and have a good day. Bye for now.